All right, we are back on the show, folks, getting set for UFC Fight Night this Saturday night from Broomfield, Colorado. Main card, 10 p.m. Eastern here in Canada on TSN 5. Prelims happening live here on Fight Network at 8 Eastern. An interesting main event, to say the least. We have Benson Henderson stepping up in weight to 170 pounds. He joins us on the line right now, getting set for Brandon Thatch. Benson, first of all, just tell us, here you are fight week, fighting at 170 pounds. Is it discernibly different here, getting set for welterweight, and how your body is reacting fight week?
Well, definitely different.
I'm
not starving myself to death, so definitely a big difference. But just, feeling a lot better these last few days leading up to weigh-ins, not as low on energy and low on calories, that sort of stuff.
The weight division and fighting at 170 is going to be, and I'm sure it already has been, a huge part of what people are talking about with you. That and taking the fight on 2 weeks' notice. Is this something that concerns you, or you and your team are focused on? Is the difference in weight, or is it a fight as a fight?
A fight's a fight. You definitely have to be aware of certain things. If your opponent has a big high kick, a big left high kick to the head, you have to be aware of that. But you go in there, your fight's your fight. If your guy has a little bit of a size advantage of you, or if he has a longer reach advantage, or if he has, any kind of stuff you have to be aware of. But in general, a fight's a fight. Go in there and go do your thing.
We go back just a couple of weeks ago to the Donald Cerrone fight. It's a fight that a lot of people have debated back and forth. I'll be perfectly honest, Benson. I scored the fight for you. I thought you did win that fight. Was this a case of just some sense of frustration coming out of that fight that I want to immediately get back in there? It's kind of what you echoed after the fight immediately in the cage that night. Was that just you just want to get to your next fight and kind of get
behind you,
get through all of that?
Yeah, definitely wanted to her to get back in there. Donald's my boy. I love him to death. So all I'll say about that fight is the judges awarded the decision another way than what we thought, and then what I thought. It is what it is. You have to man up and move on. You have to move forward. You can't whine. You can whine and complain about it as much as you want, but ultimately it doesn't do you any good. Everything's going to stay the same. Nothing changes. You just wasted a lot of energy and made it put that negative energy. Why not use that energy instead to get better, work on your jab, work on your takedown defense, work on something to help yourself get better. So that's what I focused on.
Nice. While we're looking back at fights, I want to look back for a minute at the 10 rounds you did with Frankie Edgar, because it's sort of relevant in this fight, right? You had what advantages did you feel you had over a smaller guy in that fight, or was there anything in the size difference that mattered to you when you fought Frankie?
No, I don't think the size difference was that big a deal with Frankie. A little bit, Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing for us was the speed advantage. We thought he was going to be a lot quicker, and he was quick, but we were able to minimize the speed advantage we thought he was going to have. And if you watch the fight, in both fights, my jab landed pretty consistently throughout the fight. So that speed advantage, we were able to do a good job laying our jab against him to kind of neutralize that speed advantage that we thought he was going to have. But I would say the biggest thing for Frankie Edgar was fighting in Denver here that second time, fighting the elevation. I think the biggest factor for us that we're most aware of is obviously Brandon's a tough kid, big-time finisher for sure, but you're fighting the elevation. Off 2 weeks' notice, all the best experts, the cyclists, marathon runners, all athletes of all sorts, they all say you need at least 3 weeks at elevation to prepare to get your body acclimated to elevation.
Yep.
And taking the fight on 2 weeks' notice, definitely I didn't have 3 weeks to acclimate my body to high elevation. So the big thing for me is was that aspect of it. But having fought here in Denver before against Frankie, I felt great. I felt fine. And having wrestled in Denver before in the past, coming here on short notice and wrestling, I was able to handle that, and that's why we agreed to take the fight here in Denver. Most guys the UFC asked, they all said no, because Brandon's a tough kid, but he's an up-and-comer, so they weren't really too worried about Brandon, but they were worried about the elevation and being 5 rounds.
That's interesting. The reason I asked about Frankie Edgar is because you're kind of taking his role in this fight. You are theoretically the smaller, quicker fighter, and Brandon is the bigger fighter that maybe you try to exploit with size. Do you think about that at all, or you exploit with speed? Do you think about that role that you're kind of Frankie versus you?
I wouldn't necessarily word it that way. If you so choose to word it that way, that's fine by me. Go ahead, but I wouldn't necessarily word it that way. But we are definitely aware. Moving up to 170, there's some pros and cons. Obviously, the con being giving up the strength advantage, giving up a little bit of size, that sort of stuff. But we think a big time pro to moving up a weight class is definitely the speed advantage, the quickness advantage, the agility advantage, and then the cardio advantage as well. So we're taking all those, pros that we think, and we're hoping that they come through during the fight and they show up during the fight.
When you are in the midst of a really heavy weight cut, Benson, I'm sure that the thought has maybe percolated inside of you. The idea of, if we were just in a sport where weight cutting was thrown out, what would be the perfect weight that you would love to just walk into the octagon? Weight cutting is not a factor in this sport, which was very much the tradition in Japan, where that wasn't embedded in the fighting culture. They just fought at their walk-around weight. I mean, what is Benson Henderson's perfect weight that you would love to fight at every single time out?
For the most part, for me, like at my gym, we spar every weekend. We have a lot of times harder sparring rounds than we do actual fights. That's the way it's supposed to be. But for me, when I'm at my gym, when I'm training hard, maybe like the second or third week of a training camp is when I feel the best. Eating healthy, eating good, no junk food, no fast food, nothing like that. I'm not too worried about my calories just yet, lowering my caloric intake. And I walk around then about 172, 173 pounds at like 5 to 6% body fat. I feel great when I'm right there. If I get a little bit heavier than that, if I'm walking around 78, 77, 79, 80 even sometimes, then I feel a little bit sluggish, a little bit slow. If I get any lighter than 72, I feel a little bit weak, not as strong. But at 172, 173, I feel as strong as I do at 180, and then quicker as well. So that is all the best. I feel the greatest at 172, 173.
Nice. I want to ask you another question about advantages. You have almost 3.5 hours of UFC cage time, and this guy has, I think, 213 seconds of cage time. How do you make that? How do you make this fight about that? All that time you spend in there, all of those, how familiar you are, how comfortable you are. How do you make this fight about that?
We got to make sure it lasts long in the first place. He's a first-round finisher, has a great killer instincts. He hurts guys not too badly, and then he's able to swarm over them. So we got to make sure that we get it out of the first round, and then we use our experience advantage to do that, and then to make him pay in the second, third, fourth, and fifth rounds.
This might sound like a bit of a weird question, Benson, but I mean, the last week to 10 days, it's been a real downer in mixed martial arts. I think a lot of people, it's really an ugly light with all of the stories with Anderson Silva and so on and so forth. I think a lot of people are very much looking forward to this specific fight as kind of just take their mind off of the bad and look at a fight that there's a lot of intrigue with your involvement, with so many interesting questions to this fight. Is there anything here, you're going in here that, let's put kind of a positive light on what's been kind of a unfortunate 2 weeks where a lot of bad has been spoken?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, like there's always going to be something that occurs, something that happens, that when those pile up one after another, it kind of wears on fans, it wears on the fighters, it wears on the athletes, whether you're in the NFL, and there's always, bad news this, bad news that, bad news this, one after the other. It can be kind of a downer, but hopefully we'll be able to take some of that spotlight and turn it into a positive, be a source of, good news to the UFC fan base and to the fighters and to the UFC itself and to some of the higher up execs of the UFC, perhaps being a good news source of light for them.
Nice. John asked you about how you feel only having to cut to 170. Sitting around on a phone talking to some guys in Canada about your upcoming fight, is that a lot easier when you only have to weigh 170 pounds on Friday than it is when you had to weigh 155?
That is 100 times easier. I'll be honest with you guys, man. When I do these interviews, week of the fight, I don't know how a lot of UFC sets them up like that, but when I do these interviews and I'm like down to 161 pounds and I'm the last couple of days for weigh-ins, the last thing I want to do is get on the phone with you guys. That the answers and the replies I give you guys are always more like, yes,
right.
Oh, I'll do my best.
Well,
fight hard. It's so much easier. People don't realize what kind of this mindset you go through when you're literally starving yourself to death. Like when you make weight, it's like the bodybuilders. Like when you literally starve yourself to death, and then if you were to keep that up, if bodybuilders were to keep up how they maintain their bodies to get down to performance, the same as fighters. If the fighters were to keep up what we do to our bodies for longer than 4 or 5 days of how bad we get down the weight, we wouldn't literally be able to live. It would kill us. We would kill ourselves. Same thing for bodybuilders. If they had to maintain what they do to get down when they have a performance, they would literally kill themselves. So it's hard, man. It's really tough on you, and it doesn't get any easier. The more experience you get with it, with boxing, you get better and better at boxing, and eventually boxing becomes easier. And journalism, you become a journalist, and it gets hard at first, but eventually as you learn the ropes, it gets easier and easier. With getting down the weight, it doesn't really get easier. It stays sucky the entire time. You get better at it. You become smarter at it. You know what you need to eat. You know how many calories you need to take in. You know how many milligrams of sodium you can take in. You know what time of day to eat your carbohydrates, yada, yada, yada. But it still sucks just as bad every single time.
Yeah, I've done it 9 times too, man. I fought, and so I know how you feel. And your voice, you can just tell that you're actually having a much more pleasant week, and hopefully that carries over right into the cage.
Thank you, man. I'm fully intended on making that the case.
Well, we're looking forward to it a lot, Benson. It's happening Saturday night, UFC Fight Night. We've got our live preview show on Fight Network at 7 Eastern, prelims at 8, and then main card 10 p.m. Eastern on TSN 5. All the best, Benson, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Yes.